From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Rhode Island's largest philanthropic organization is trying to tackle two major challenges: education and healthcare. The Rhode Island Foundation convened two panels of experts to come up with a blueprint for the future. What did they find is holding the state back, and what needs to be done? Our guest on the first half of Newsmakers, Rhode Island Foundation President and CEO Neil Steinberg. Then, the Democratic presidential primary process keeps getting messier. Iowa and New Hampshire failed to winnow the field, leaving at least a half dozen major candidates still competitive. Where do the Democrats go now? Our political roundtable returns for a New Hampshire primary post-mortem on the second half of Newsmakers. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the program is Eyewitness News reporter and politics editor Ted Nesi. Neil Steinberg from the Rhode Island Foundation. Great to have you back in the program.
Thank you. Good morning.
As I said in the intro there, you pulled together, the Rhode Island Foundation pulled together stakeholders to address two big topics: healthcare and education. Before we get into the findings and recommendations on those, being a part of both working groups, did you find that there was overlap between those two subjects? Was there something impacting access to good education and good healthcare that a section of society shares?
Absolutely. And when you look at it, so just very simply, that it's well documented that a child who is not healthy is not going to learn well when they're in school. It's well documented that the better your education, the more educated people tend to be healthier. And then you have the equity piece. So on health and healthcare, it's called disparities, the differences, some groups doing better than others. And in education, it's called the achievement gap. They all come from the same place, whether there's housing, whether there's food, whether there's transportation. So there's a lot of overlap.
I'd like to start with the education. Mm-hmm. Okay, so shelves grown with the weight of studies and reports on K through 12 education in this state alone. Why is yours different?
Yeah, so that was the first question we got a year and a half ago when we decided the state needed a long-term plan. And I have all of those in my, on my shelves. And it's the standard is we don't need another 150-page report that goes on the shelf. 20 pages. So number one, it's not 150 pages. It's a focused, targeted strategic plan. It's long-term. It's looking to places like Massachusetts that started 25 years ago. The mantra is chart the course, stay the course, have high standards. And then not only did we look at this so that it would be intelligent, it would be long-term, it would get away from special interest, but we looked at how to sustain it, and that's going to be the difference. So this is going to be sustainable. This 10-year plan is going to be used by the Commissioner of Education as the basis for the new Rhode Island Department of Education 5-year strategic plan. She is committed to that. This committee will stay together as an advisory council to the Department of Education and the Commissioner. This will not just sit on the shelf. We will make sure it lives and breathes.
So, you know, a lot has happened on education policy lately. You have a new commissioner, you have the Providence schools take over, the funding formula, which is now being reviewed again, the bunch of new laws
last year
recently passed, curriculum,
modeled after
Massachusetts.
Right, correct.
I'm just curious, I mean, was the feeling in the end on the task force around, you know, because it says chart the course, stay the course. Is the current charted course a good one, but the concern is falling off it and doing other things? Or do you need to change course and then stay that different course?
Yeah, so to your original point, I feel very strongly this is a unique moment in time. I've been around a long time. I have not seen the convergence of the legislation, of the bond for school buildings, of a new commissioner, of finally addressing our capital city, and then pulling it together, looking long term. I have not seen those all together, so I really do think it's a moment in time. Part of it is changing the course a bit. Part of it started with that. So those pieces of legislation about site-based management, the principals having the authorities in the schools, about curriculum reform and frameworks, very, very key to this. But the current course isn't doing it. The current course is not addressing these inequities and these big achievement gaps. We've had the highest Latino achievement gap in the United States for many years, well documented. We've got to change that. Shortage of teachers in certain areas of special ed and STEM, shortage of teachers of color, more engagement with parents. So there's a lot of things that we set out here. This is supposed to be both aspirational and inspirational. The vision here is for world-class education for all our students in 10 years. And people say, well, what does that mean? We know, it's documented. There's a document that says this is a world-class education. Massachusetts benchmarks against Singapore. we benchmark against other states that don't do as well as we do. So part of it is changing, but it is a unique point in time to your point about things coming together, and we got to do it. We got to leverage all these things.
One of the report's recommendations is sustaining a, quote, rigorous statewide assessment system. We just adopted RICAS, which is modeled after Massachusetts. Is that not what the group found we're talking about here?
Exactly what we're talking about, but look back, how many times have we changed it?
Many.
Every 3 years. This is saying, keep that, stay the course. So what this group is designed to do, new governor comes in 3 years, wakes up one morning, different test. This group and others has to mobilize, say, no, we got to keep going with that. That's the one that we adopted. That's the one that we can use to
But a new
compare.
governor brings in a new education commissioner, and there's a new General Assembly. If they want to change it, they're going to change it.
They're going to change it. Somehow, not that Massachusetts envy, Massachusetts went through the same thing. Different governors, different speakers, different senators, Senate presidents, stay the course. That's the mantra of stay the course. When I meet with the governor, which I did, I met with the Senate president, I met with the speaker to go over this. That mantra of stay the course has to become part of the culture. And we need to make sure that the guardrails of this report guide us into the future.
I saw that one of the folks that was in the committee, I guess to use the word of the group, was Frank Flynn, the president of AF2. One thing you hear from some administrators is the patchwork of collective bargaining agreements with teachers throughout the state can be a hurdle when implementing change in the classroom. Many union contracts have language that address components to day-to-day learning. Was that part of the discussion, part of the calculus? I didn't see union contract, the word union contract,
Correct.
the phrase collective bargaining agreement in this report.
Right. So again, you know, what this was designed to do, start at the vision level, start at the strategy level, to get into next steps. So we didn't go into day-to-day type of union contracts. And the thing that helped us get this done, because you look at the group, it's a very imposing task to take on with a disparate group. We had two ground rules. One was leave your stripes at the door, and the other was think long term. So where do you want to be in 10 years? People's tendency naturally is go into the building, what do we need now? So clearly addressing union contracts will be necessary, but what does it get you to? It gets you to curriculum, it gets you to instruction, it gets you to supporting the teachers, it gets you to professional development. Those things are in here.
I want to ask you about the healthcare report too, of course. And one of the things I found interesting that I'd like you to spell out a little for people, when you released the healthcare report, you talked about affordable housing, food security, and transportation. Usually we think healthcare, people think, how much is my health insurance, who owns the hospitals, et cetera. But talk a little about how that became one of the higher profile findings or priorities of the task force on the healthcare side.
So recognizing that we had the CEOs from the hospitals, the CEOs from the insurance companies, the dean of the medical school, the dean of the School of Public Health, the Nursing Association, and everybody else around the table, I was actually surprised. We set out to do a long-term plan for healthcare. There hasn't been one in 30 years here. In the first meeting, it switched from healthcare to health. And that's what you see is health in Rhode Island. The significance of that is that 20% of our outcomes are due to the healthcare system. 80% are due to everything else. Social determinants, heredity, the environment. So that going to the hospital, going to the doctor, clearly when you're in the hospital, it's 100% of your outcome. But quickly, everybody around the table said, we need to look at how do we get a healthier population. Complete switch, including with the business community. We have people from CVS and Hasbro on this. Once we did that, then we looked at root causes. Then we looked at disparities. And again, that dose of equity, that highlighting of equity, both in education and here, that there are groups that have different maternity outcomes. There are groups that have different diabetes outcomes. We can't either afford it or we can't stand for it to have that here. So that's when we got to these root causes. And so other countries, when you look at the world stage and you look at the stats for the industrialized world, we spend the highest of any country and we get mediocre results. We do not have the highest life expectancy in the world here, not even close. What do those countries do? They spend more on the preventative. They spend more on these social services.
I want to ask you too. You were beating the drum for a while about Rhode Island's the potential / need for an academic medical center in Rhode Island, which of course is usually seen as the nicer way to say we need to figure out how to have Lifespan and Care New England merge. I mean, at the end of this process, do you still think that's the right course for the two big hospital groups?
Yeah. So let me just try.
I know they were both. I know they were both on your.
So this is
thing.
10 years. How do we get healthier outcomes? We talk about here wasted spending and being able to reallocate it. We talk about everybody having access to cost-effective.
But you know it's the
healthcare.
elephant in the room.
Correct. So I just want to separate from that. Do I still think that's a good idea? Yes. And but remember, we had all these players there. This was not the venue to either debate or negotiate that.
Yeah, it's
But
not
I
in a
do
footnote
think-
somewhere that they agreed to
no,
merge.
No,
yeah,
it is
okay.
not, no.
But they were in the same room.
They were in the same room.
Did they
and
talk
that's-
to each other?
And they talked to each
What
other.
side of the
and-
table were they at?
And again, when you look at this, everybody signed on to this. You know, the significance, we actually got everybody to sign. It was like shuttle diplomacy of going around to get everybody. But that kind of ability to look forward, that ability to commit, and what we asked people to do, what's best for people in Rhode Island.
So $1 million, both for education, both and for healthcare,
Right.
that the Rhode Island Foundation has pledged
Correct.
as part of this process. How does that money get used?
Yeah, so two things. First of all, it's above and beyond our regular grant making. So last year we did $56 million in grants. This is above and beyond that. So I don't want people to think we're taking it from this to do that. This is above and beyond that from our reserves. The other thing is $1 million in each is a significant commitment, but recognizing how big these issues are, you have to scale that. What we wanted to do was set an example, jumpstart, initiate different thought process, different activities consistent with these plans, consistent with the strategies. So how do they get used? We're in the grant making business. We give out money, but what we do is we respond to people's ideas. We respond to them. This is not prescriptive. So I can't tell you where that $1 million is going to go on purpose. What I can tell you is that we want to encourage, whether it's school districts, whether it's organizations, whether it's healthcare providers, whoever it is, to look at this, look at these strategies, and come up with ideas that fit with these strategies that admittedly are broad and cover a lot of area, and help us push things forward. And we hope it will incent and leverage other money.
I have to ask you about a story WPRI alum Dan McGowan had in the Boston Globe on a different topic. Some sort of deal to potentially have the Superman building maybe taken over by the Rhode Island Foundation or use estate tax or something. And it sounds like it was still very much an early conversation stage, but he did get you to talk about it just a little bit. Just curious, how real is this? How far along is that discussion?
So what I'd like to do is give you kryptonite and let you deal with it. It is an iconic building. It needs to be transformed for the benefit of downtown Providence. I'm an old banker.
You worked there, people should
I
remember.
worked there for 25 years. I grew up there. But I'm an old banker. I understand finance. We're located downtown. Even in the past, when there have been ideas around, people have asked us about the ideas. The only thing I will say is what I said there. We were in some preliminary discussions about saving it. That's different than acquiring it. We're not taking our endowment money and buying the thing. If there are ways that we could be helpful, if there's a role for philanthropy, then we would do it. But it's very, very premature. And we're not in any discussions with the owner of the building.
You are downtown and
Correct.
you work there, and we're running out of time, but I just have to ask, I mean, what is the effect? You've watched the place deteriorate and, of course, have a longer history with it. I mean, do you think we need to start thinking about just knocking it down and starting over there, or do you think there has to be a plan to save it?
I'll be the guy in chains when they try to knock it down. So no, I mean, I think it's an iconic building. I don't think it's that falling apart. It's a big project to fix it up inside. No, I think it's a big anchor there. And it's just a question of mobilizing. The Masonic Temple was empty for years, but the transformation is just people downtown. It's the gateway from one side to the other, over to the 195 district, from the basin over there at Water Place Park. The vibrancy of what goes on in Kennedy Plaza and everything, I think, is dependent on that. So I'm hopeful that there are ways that it can be utilized.
Neil Steinberg from the Rhode Island Foundation. Best of luck to
Thank you.
When we come back, we bring back Joe Fleming and Lisa Pelosi, a post-mortem on the New Hampshire primaries. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. On the second half, we're bringing back the political roundtable. Joe Fleming, our Eyewitness News political analyst, and Lisa Pelosi, a political analyst, along with our politics editor, Ted Nesi. All right, we're focusing on the New Hampshire primaries, and I just want to ask the table if you think this assessment that I have of the primaries, and particularly Bernie Sanders, is a fair assessment or not. While he won, his victory raises questions about his ceiling because with a plurality vote of, I think it was 26%, you look at that, but the moderate Democrats, and by moderates in my book, I mean Biden, Buttigieg, and Klobuchar, got a total of, I believe, 52%. So while his win is headline generating, are there red flags in his campaign going on right now?
I think definitely. I think Bernie has a solid base, looks like 25% or so most of these primaries, but the question is, can he go higher? He got 61% 4 years ago. He dropped down to 25%.
Do you think a lot of that had also to do with who he was running against?
Yes, a lot of people did not like Hillary Clinton, and they voted for her voted for him based on that.
Yeah.
But I don't see where Bernie has really expanded his base. Like, he did not do well with the moderates or the people between the ages of 45 and 64 in the primary. He needs to expand his base, and that's not happening. And right now, the biggest thing going in his favor is the primary with moderates is getting larger. Michael Bloomberg is another moderate, so that vote's going to get divided. That's going to help Bernie in the Super Tuesday states. But the problem is, no one is getting anywhere near a majority of the delegates at this point.
Lisa?
Yeah, so I think what we saw is 3 out of 4 voters chose not to vote for Bernie Sanders in New Hampshire. And we know the voters in New Hampshire, especially after Iowa, really wanted to step up. They really wanted to make their mark as the first in the nation of really saying where this race is going. So when we look at the next 2 coming up, the Nevada caucus and the South Carolina, we can expect Bernie Sanders not to do well in either place. So I don't know if he's peaked, that this is his ceiling right now, that he has that or not.
Well, I think one thing to keep in mind is simply Bernie's support's solid. Everybody else's support is like mush. People are moving around everywhere. I mean, Amy came on because she had a good debate. She bumped up. If she didn't have a good debate, Pete Buttigieg might have won that primary.
She also might have gotten a bump up because Joe Biden hopped on a flight down to South Carolina while the polls were open. Midday.
But they also could have gone to Pete. Yeah. I think because she did well that week and she got some momentum and people came around to her instead of going to Pete.
Yeah, I think in some ways Pete Buttigieg, the timing helped him to the extent that if Amy Klobuchar had a couple more days, if that debate had been the previous Wednesday or something, she was rising so quickly, clearly, in the polls. She might have surpassed him or at least gotten up there too. I think the funny thing is I don't disagree at all that there are red flags for Bernie Sanders, his support, his ceiling seems low, et cetera. At the same time, at the moment, I'd probably rather be Bernie Sanders than any of the other campaigns because as Elizabeth Warren seems to collapse, he's got the progressive lean more and more to himself. As Joe and Lisa said, so many moderates splitting the vote, all of whom seem well-funded enough to fight on for a while. If Bernie Sanders can keep getting pluralities out of different states and different places, and this is a fight for delegates in the end, and the Democrats divide up the delegates proportionally. So
right. It's not a winner take all.
So he could end up without a majority of delegates, but with a plurality of them, and then it's going to be harder and harder for the establishment Democrats not to block him from the nomination, I think.
Go ahead,
because
Joe.
it comes Super Tuesday, you may get 3 or 4 winners out of that because there's so many states and people can't concentrate all in one state. They got to pick the states they want to run in. And in turn, you may have 3, 4 people claiming victory on Super Tuesday, which makes it even worse.
All right, I want to rip a Band-Aid off because this group has bullied me into making sure we talk about the white whale, the possibility of a brokered convention. Ted, just quickly, if you can, summarize what a brokered convention is.
Yeah, so I mean, we all remember, we've seen movies or read about the old-time conventions where people in smoke-filled rooms, guys, I would say generally.
I love how you're painting a picture.
Yeah, 6, 8 men, right, would choose Harry Truman as going to be the nominee. Suddenly, some bosses and political guys would figure it out when the convention would ratify it, there'd be negotiations there. We haven't seen that for decades, right? We have a primary process, someone clearly has the most delegates, we know they're going to be the nominee, there's no drama at the convention. As I just said, if you have a scenario where no one has a majority of the delegates going into the convention, it's been split various ways, you raise the possibility that there's going to have to be deals made to get someone to a majority, and that suddenly the convention gets very interesting.
I feel like we talk about this every 4 years. But
okay, but because it's so enticing, I mean, it's just so intriguing to go back to this. So just to look at the last time around, that when we were just talking about Bernie, he was able to keep the voting going through the primaries up into June, right? So when it came to the July convention, that's why we thought there could be a possibility there. And even slightly on the Republican side with Ted Cruz, there was a thought, did people not want Trump, so could we work behind the scenes? But again, we haven't had a brokered convention since 1952, so it's been a very, very long time. But the way this primary season is, the way the dates are, there'll be enough candidates with enough delegates, so very well when we go into July, they're not going to have that magic number to go forward.
Yeah, I think right now there's a better chance because you're like 6 viable candidates at this point, so the votes are getting divided up. The one thing to keep in mind is a brokered convention, the super delegates, unlike 4 years ago, do not vote on the first ballot. They vote on the second ballot. And that's all your governors, Congress people. So they're going to have a big impact on this if it gets past the first ballot.
And of course, they're petrified, I think, of that scenario because look how much abuse the superdelegates got over that system last time, even when Hillary Clinton was clearly on the way to it. If they're actually choosing the nominee and potentially many of them wanting to overlook Bernie Sanders on top, again, all hypothetical, but you could see a very divided Democratic Party this summer.
You say Bernie Sanders on top. He might be on top with only 30% of the delegates, not even close to the 50%.
So with that in mind, then, we look ahead to April 28th, Rhode Island's primary. Could Rhode Island's 26 Democratic delegates actually matter? Or is Rhode Island going to matter, our primary?
I think so. I thought, Rhode Island's primary is so late, you might get a candidate to visit. We've seen that the last couple cycles.
Isn't that cute?
Yeah, exactly, but not really a fight for Rhode Island like we saw in 2008. I remember you interviewed Hillary Clinton that year.
Yep.
They were all here. But if, as Joe says, there's 6 active, even if it's not 6, just say there's just 3 or 4 viable candidates still fighting it out through the spring, well, suddenly Rhode Island's 26 delegates will make a difference. It won't be as big a deal as the other. They call that day the Acela primary because New York's voting, Delaware's voting, Connecticut's voting. There's some bigger states, but you don't want to overlook Rhode Island. You'd love to pocket those if you could. So I think the odds of Rhode Island actually mattering are rising, and of course Massachusetts is definitely going to matter because they vote Super Tuesday, which is coming right up.
What did Biden get in New Hampshire? 8%?
8%, I believe.
True or false, his campaign is on the ropes?
No question. He's definitely on the ropes. He has to basically come in first or second in Nevada, I believe, and he has to win South Carolina. And right now, he's winning South Carolina, but not by as much he has been. Tom Stiles is moving up there. He's getting a good percent of the black vote in South Carolina, which is definitely hurting Joe Biden.
Well, he's on the air considerably.
Yeah, he spent a lot of money. I mean, think about these primaries in Super Tuesday. So far on the Super Tuesday states, Michael Bloomberg has spent $127 million on advertising.
Just an unfathomable amount this early,
Then Bernie Sanders has spent $7 million. Joe Biden has spent nothing. So these candidates have not put the money in. Bloomberg, that's why he's moving up. He's spending all this money.
Why is that? Does anybody ever thought, why wouldn't he, if his campaign's on the ropes, he really has to do well in South Carolina?
Right.
I mean, he's pretty much ignoring the Nevada caucus, right? He's just not going there. So it doesn't.
No, I wouldn't say that. I think Biden's definitely fighting for Nevada.
Okay.
He's done all right in the polls there. His whole thing is you're getting to diverse states now. He's like, these lily white, my base is more diverse than the others, and we're getting out of lily white states like Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada. But yes, no doubt, his priority
is South Carolina. So why wouldn't he be on the air more in South Carolina and spend his money there?
I just don't know if he has a lot of money.
Yeah, I think he's spending money there. He doesn't have a lot of money, as Ted said. And the thing is, too, Amy and Pete are not strong with the minority communities. So that does benefit Joe Biden. And that's why he left New Hampshire and went right to South Carolina.
And we still have a number of southern states coming up.
Absolutely.
And then the last time, 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton did well and Bernie Sanders did not do well in the southern states. So if Biden can pick up those southern states, that could give him some momentum.
And I'm looking at some polls right now that just came out today. Texas, Sanders is ahead by 2 points. But in Florida, Michael Bloomberg's ahead. In Arkansas, Michael Bloomberg's ahead because he's spending the money there. People are getting to know him.
Now, I am a little skeptical right now of, I think Bloomberg is, now he's, this is the cycle, right? We always see it. Candidate is lower profile, so they start to run ads and people are like, oh, I never hear anything bad about this person, I'll vote for that person. Then suddenly,
an audio tape comes
you're
out.
important enough that the other candidates start calling important reporters and saying, hey, don't forget what Mike Bloomberg said this year, and there's a bad story, and then suddenly, so we got to see if Mike Bloomberg can now sustain getting pushback, getting negative coverage, getting pushback from his others. But it does become easier probably to fight back when you have a gajillion dollars.
And that goes right to my point. All the support is soft.
Yeah.
They see some good things, they move up. Then they hear some bad things, they move away.
And we talked about last time about the debates, and we haven't seen Michael Bloomberg in a debate, but what we have seen is once there's a front runner emerging, all the other candidates start pointing their arrows at them.
Like Pete the other night.
Yeah, so if Bloomberg's on the stage and there are 6 others, and there are 6 of them pointing arrows on him, he's going to be going like
And
this all the time.
he could be, I believe as of this morning, we don't know yet if he'll be in the upcoming debate, or has that been decided
I
yet?
thought he was, but maybe not.
Not next week,
sure.
but I think the one before South Carolina.
Okay, yeah.
So-
So we could, finally see him on the stage.
All right, so we have about a minute left. I want to just talk about voter turnout. In New Hampshire, it was up from 2016, though I guess I was reading something that the voter population there actually grew. So, but when you consider that undeclared voters, so independent voters, can vote in the primary there, so it's not completely closed, it's sort of open, does that indicate good things for Democrats, that voter turnout was up?
It definitely does indicate good things for Democrats, because in Iowa it wasn't up, and that was a bad sign. But now in New Hampshire, a swing state, they've gone Democrat many years, but it's very close. That's a good sign for the Democrats to hold on to the state, that more people are coming out to vote in the Democratic primary.
And we've only had, we just had the midterms, and I believe it was the highest midterm turnout since 1912 or 1914 or something, in 100 plus years. So, you would expect on both sides just very high voter engagement in this election.
All right, thank you all for joining us on the. We'll probably have you back next week. The way this is going, Joe Fleming, Lisa Pelosi, Ted Nesi, of course. I'm Tim White. Thank you for watching. Don't forget our podcast on iTunes. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.